Hold still, Brenda. For the love of all that is beige and boring, just hold still. That was Sal, the less hairy and slightly less tattooed half of my contracting duo, his voice a low growl of exasperation that could curdle milk at 50 paces. Brenda, perched precariously on the back of her electric golf cart. The compliance cruiser, naturally, was doing a passable impression of a startled flamingo, all jerky limbs and squawking indignation. "Unhand me, you! You construction barbarian!" she shrieked, clutching her clipboard to her chest like a shield against Sal's surprisingly gentle attempt to steady her. Manny, the other half of the operation, a man whose silence usually spoke volumes, mostly about the questionable life choices that led to his current profession, was leaning against the cement mixer, a slow grin spreading across his weathered face. The rhythmic churn of the drum provided a low, comedic soundtrack to the unfolding absurdity. Me? I was trying very hard not to facepalm so hard I'd give myself a concussion. It was Tuesday. Just another glorious Tuesday in the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association, where the most pressing existential threat was apparently a rogue dandelion or a slightly askew recycling bin. My own personal contribution to this suburban symphony of petty grievances was the ongoing construction of my long-dreamed-of garage workshop. A sanctuary. A place where power tools hummed a more soothing tune than Brenda's incessant droning about bylaw infractions. The current crisis? According to Brenda, the 1.4 ounces of residual water that had dared to escape the maw of Sal's cement mixer and kiss the pristine asphalt of my driveway was an environmental catastrophe of biblical proportions. Bylaw 113.8, subsection C, if you were keeping score at home. Unauthorized fluid discharge. The horror. "Brenda," I said, trying to inject a semblance of calm into the escalating melodrama. "It's water, H2O, the stuff that falls from the sky. Remember rain?" She glared down at me from her precarious perch, her grip tightening on her binder, a veritable Bible of suburban tyranny. "That water, Alexander, contains trace elements of concrete. It could leach into the groundwater. Think of the children." Ah, yes, the children. They were always the ultimate victims in Brenda's twisted narratives of HOA apocalypse. I'd once received a strongly worded email from her claiming my overly enthusiastic leaf blower was causing undue stress to little Timmy Henderson's goldfish. "The children will be fine, Brenda," I assured her, my tone dangerously close to sarcasm. Years of dealing with military logistics, coordinating the movement of personnel and materiel across continents, often under less than ideal circumstances, had honed my ability to remain outwardly placid while inwardly contemplating elaborate escape routes. Right now, that escape route involved a fully equipped workshop and the blissful silence of sawing lumber. "Sal's already put down the HOA-approved absorbent mat," I added, gesturing to the small, pathetic square of blue fabric that looked woefully inadequate against the vast expanse of driveway. Sal grunted in agreement, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of a dirt-stained hand. "Yeah, Brenda. Good as new. Cleaner than your conscience, probably." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "That is a personal attack. I shall note this in the official incident report." Manny chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Incident report for what? A little spilled water? Lady, I've seen more liquid come out of a busted fire hydrant." Brenda shot him a withering look. "Your lack of respect for community regulations is precisely why this HOA exists, sir." This was our dance, a tedious, repetitive waltz of suburban angst, with Brenda always leading in her heavily orthotic, sensible shoes. I usually just played along, offering sarcastic commentary and grudging compliance, all while counting down the minutes until I could retreat into the relative sanity of my house. What Brenda didn't know, what none of them knew as they bickered over a few drops of water, was that my carefully constructed wall of detached amusement was about to be breached. My world, usually confined to spreadsheets, emails, and the slow progress of my workshop construction, was about to collide with a reality far more urgent than perfectly manicured lawns and harmonious paint palettes. My specialized pager, a relic from my Air Force days that now served a far different purpose, vibrated insistently on my hip. It wasn't the usual low hum of a system check. This was the sharp, insistent buzz of a high-priority alert. I subtly shifted my weight, turning my back to Brenda and the contractors as I glanced at the screen. The casual banter in my head screeched to a halt, replaced by the familiar, ice-cold focus that years of critical decision-making had instilled. Code Echo, Lung, Pediatric, match confirmed, ETA 1630, your location for staging. My breath hitched. Echo, Pediatric, Lung. This wasn't some drill or a low-priority transport. This was it. This was the real deal. I straightened up, the petty absurdity of the driveway debate instantly fading into insignificance. Brenda was still lecturing Sal about the proper disposal of concrete dust. Manny was stifling another laugh. They had no idea that their little suburban drama was about to become a crucial backdrop in a life-or-death race against time. My volunteer work with Second Wind wasn't something I advertised. It was a quiet commitment, a way to channel my logistical expertise into something truly meaningful. We provided the behind-the-scenes support for time-sensitive organ transplants, the unglamorous but vital task of coordinating transportation and staging points to ensure precious cargo reached its destination as quickly and efficiently as possible. My quiet, relatively isolated house, with its soon-to-be functional garage and proximity to several major arteries, had been pre-approved as a neutral handoff location. The medical-grade power outlet I'd insisted on installing in the garage, much to Brenda's initial suspicion about unnecessary electrical modifications, was about to serve its purpose. I glanced at my watch. 15:12. The estimated time of arrival for the transport team was just under an hour and a half away. Time enough to clear the area, secure the garage, and prepare for the handoff. I turned back to Sal and Manny, my voice now carrying a different weight. All right, guys. That's enough for today. We need to wrap things up. Sal looked surprised. Already? We were just about to start on the second wall. Something unexpected has come up, I said, keeping my tone neutral but firm. I need the driveway completely clear within the next 15 minutes. Sal exchanged a look with Manny. Problem, boss? Did the beige police find another violation? I managed a tight smile. Something like that. Let's just call it a priority shipment coming in. Need the space. They saw the shift in my demeanor, the absence of the usual sarcastic glint in my eyes. They'd worked for me long enough to know when I was serious. Without another word, they started efficiently gathering their tools and materials. Even Manny's movements seemed more purposeful. Brenda, however, was still in full grievance mode. A priority shipment? What kind of business are you running out of this residential zone, Alexander? I distinctly recall reviewing your initial architectural plans, and there was no mention of... I cut her off, my patience finally wearing thin. Brenda, with all due respect, your bylaw concerns are now approximately 10 million miles below my current priority level. The driveway needs to be clear, now! The sharpness in my voice seemed to finally penetrate her self-absorption. She blinked, her mouth slightly agape. For a fleeting moment, she looked almost human. Then the moment passed. She straightened her shoulders, clutching her binder tighter. I shall be watching, Alexander, and if this is shipment violates any regulations... I didn't wait to hear the rest. I had a garage to prepare, a life hanging in the balance, and a rapidly dwindling amount of time to make sure everything went according to plan. The Cold War in the cul-de-sac was about to take a dramatic and potentially life-saving turn. The next hour passed in a blur of focused activity. I swept the garage floor, checked the power outlet, and laid out a clean sheet of protective plastic. My second wind phone chimed with updates. The donor organ had been successfully retrieved. The transport team was en route, estimated arrival holding steady at 16:30. Outside, Sal and Manny had packed up their truck and were gone. The driveway was clear. The only remaining obstacle was Brenda, who had retreated to her porch swing, binoculars in hand, like a general surveying enemy territory. At 16:25, a text message arrived. En route. Driver is Dave. Unmarked gray transit van. I took a deep breath, the familiar tension of an impending operation settling in my shoulders. This wasn't dodging bullets in some dusty corner of the world, but the stakes felt just as high. Higher, perhaps. A child's life depended on the next few minutes going smoothly. At 16:28, a nondescript gray van turned onto Maple Creek Drive. It was clean, professional, and exactly as described. Relief washed over me. So far, so good. But as the van approached my driveway, Brenda made her move. With surprising speed for someone who usually moved with the cautious deliberation of a snail crossing a salt flat, she zipped down her driveway on the compliance cruiser. And then, in an act of breathtaking audacity, she parked it directly across the entrance to mine, completely blocking the van's path. My jaw dropped. I stared in disbelief. This wasn't just petty, this was malicious. Dave, the driver, a young man with tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, rolled down his window, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. I walked towards Brenda's golf cart, my hands clenched. The calm I'd been clinging to began to fray at the edges. "Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously low. "What in God's name are you doing?" She tapped her clipboard with a smug air, her eyes gleaming with self-righteous indignation. "Unmarked commercial vehicle, Bylaw 72.4. No loitering, no stopping, no conducting business without a pre-approved commercial activity permit filed 72 hours in advance." "Brenda," I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "This isn't a business. This is medical. It's urgent. You need to move, now." "Medical is not an exemption listed in Appendix F," she retorted, flipping through her binder with exaggerated deliberation. "Is there a doctor's note? A permit? I don't see a permit." "This isn't the emergency room parking lot, Brenda. It's my private driveway. You are obstructing my property." Dave leaned out of the van window, his voice tight with urgency. "Sir, we're on a clock. The transport unit has a 4-hour battery life. We've already been on the road for one." The casual mention of a 4-hour limit hit me like a punch to the gut. The sterile, temperature-controlled container holding a fragile new lung for a child was slowly counting down its operational life. Brenda, in her infinite wisdom, was treating it like a misplaced garden gnome. I tried a different tack, attempting to appeal to her non-existent sense of humanity. "Brenda, there's a very sick little girl waiting for what's in this van. Every minute you delay us could make a difference between life and death." She sniffed, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. "Emotional appeals are irrelevant, Alexander. Bylaws are bylaws. They exist for a reason, to maintain order and property values in this community." "Order?" I sputtered. "You're creating chaos. Property values? You're about to be responsible for a tragedy that will make a slightly overgrown lawn look like a minor inconvenience." Seeing that reason was futile, I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. I kept my voice level, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. an individual was unlawfully obstructing my private property and interfering with the transport of critical medical equipment. Within 10 minutes, a patrol car pulled up, lights flashing softly. Officers Miller and Davis, two young cops who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, emerged from the vehicle. They took one look at Brenda on her golf cart, blocking a perfectly ordinary-looking van, and exchanged weary glances. They knew Brenda. "Brenda," Officer Miller said with a sigh, running a hand through his short hair. "What's it this time? Is his grass a quarter-inch too high?" "Officer," Brenda declared, puffing out her chest, "I am upholding the legally binding covenants of this community. This vehicle has no authorization to be here." She brandished her binder like a legal weapon. The cops listened patiently as Brenda launched into a detailed recitation of Bylaw 72.4 and Appendix F. They tried to interject, to reason with her, but she was an unyielding force of suburban obstinacy. "Ma'am," Officer Davis said gently, "we understand your concerns, but this gentleman is stating that this is a medical transport. Perhaps if you would just move the cart—" "Without the proper permits? Absolutely not. What kind of precedent would that set? Next thing you know, we'll have food trucks and door-to-door salespeople running rampant." Dave gave me another desperate look. "Sir, cooler battery at 82%. Ambient temperature is rising. We need to go." I turned to the officers, pleadingly. "Can't you do something? She's actively preventing a medical transport." Officer Miller shrugged, his expression apologetic. "Sir, it's a private road. It's an HOA dispute. We can cite her for blocking your driveway, but we can't physically move her without a sergeant and a tow truck, and that'll take at least an hour." An hour. An eternity in the context of a fragile organ and a waiting child. My carefully constructed composure finally shattered. The sarcastic project manager vanished, replaced by the man who used to coordinate life-saving missions under enemy fire. I took a deep breath, my gaze hardening. "Okay," I said, my voice now flat and devoid of emotion. "Forget this." I turned away from the bewildered police officers and the triumphant Brenda. I walked over to Dave, who looked like he was about to have a panic attack. "What's the official transport designation number?" I asked him, my voice low and urgent. "UNOS Priority 1 AP, he stammered. "Manifest number 77 Kilo Delta." I nodded, pulling out my personal cell phone. This wasn't a call to 911. This was a call I hadn't made in years. My fingers, however, remembered the number perfectly. I held the phone to my ear, waiting through a couple of rings. "Yeah, it's me," I said, my voice clipped and professional. "Connect me to the Regional Emergency Operations Center. No, bypass the switchboard. Use my old authorization code, Sierra Tango 9er5. There was a brief pause, a moment of static on the line. Then, a familiar voice, crisp and efficient, answered. "Code Sierra Tango 9er5 confirmed. Proceed." "This is Alex Carter, former AF Log Ops," I stated, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I'm acting as a civilian coordinator for a UNOS Priority 1, a pediatric transport, manifest 77 Kilo Delta. I have a time-critical biological shipment being actively obstructed. The local authorities are unable to resolve. I am formally declaring a Code 3 medical transport emergency and requesting immediate state-level intervention." Officers Miller and Davis, who had been halfway through writing Brenda a ticket, froze, their pens hovering over their citation pads. They stared at me with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. Brenda, still perched on her golf cart, looked vaguely puzzled. "What the hell is UNOS?" Officer Davis muttered to his partner. "The nature of the obstruction is a domestic, non-state actor," I continued into the phone, ignoring the bewildered onlookers. "Yes, a civilian, no, not armed. She's weaponized a golf cart and a 3-ring binder." I listened for a moment, nodding curtly. "Understood. My location is—" I gave my address. Confirming Code 3 activation and ETA for support units. Thank you. I hung up the phone. A heavy silence descended upon Maple Creek Drive. Brenda scoffed, finally finding her voice. "Who were you calling? The president of pretend phone calls?" I didn't answer her. I just looked at my watch. 16:42. We'd already lost precious minutes. Exactly 2 minutes later, the air crackled to life. It wasn't the static of a local police radio. It was the sharp, authoritative voice of the state police dispatcher, booming from Officer Miller's radio. "All units in the vicinity of Maple Creek Estates, be advised. A state-level emergency corridor is being established for a critical medical transport. Stand by to assist. State troopers are 10 mics out." Then we heard it. A faint, distant wail. It wasn't just one siren. It was a growing chorus, a rising crescendo of urgency that cut through the peaceful suburban afternoon. The sounds grew louder, closer. First, a county sheriff's car, lights flashing with manic intensity, roared around the corner. Then 2 state trooper cruisers, their sirens screaming in unison, their presence radiating an unmistakable air of authority. More followed. They didn't slow down to chat. They fanned out, blocking off the street at both ends, creating an impromptu perimeter. A stern-faced state police sergeant, his uniform immaculate, his demeanor radiating no-nonsense competence, emerged from the lead cruiser. He completely ignored Brenda, who was now staring with wide, uncomprehending eyes. He walked directly towards Officers Miller and Davis. "Who's in charge of this situation?" he asked, his voice sharp and decisive. Officer Miller, looking slightly dazed, pointed a shaky thumb in my direction. The sergeant turned and walked towards me. "You the coordinator?" "Yes, Sergeant," I replied, meeting his gaze. "We've lost approximately 28 minutes. "We'll make it up," he said, his tone firm. He turned to 2 imposing troopers standing nearby. "Get that ridiculous thing out of the way, now!" The 2 troopers didn't hesitate. Without a word, they approached Brenda's golf cart. One grabbed the front bumper, the other the back. Brenda finally found her voice, a high-pitched shriek of outrage. "You can't do that! This is private property. I'm the HOA president." Her protests were drowned out by the groaning of the golf cart as the troopers, with surprising ease, lifted the front end and dragged it unceremoniously across her meticulously manicured lawn, leaving deep tire tracks in its wake. Brenda sputtered, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. The sergeant gestured to Dave in the van. "You're clear to proceed. Follow us. We'll have every light from here to St. Jude's Green for you." Dave, looking like he'd just witnessed a miracle, put the van in drive and slowly pulled forward. The state troopers and sheriff's cars formed a tight escort, a roaring vanguard clearing the way. With a deafening blast of sirens that echoed through the stunned neighborhood, the convoy sped off down Maple Creek Drive, leaving a bewildered silence in its wake. I stood in my driveway, the adrenaline slowly receding, the faint scent of burning rubber lingering in the air. Officers Miller and Davis were staring at the tire tracks on Brenda's lawn, their mouths slightly agape. Brenda, meanwhile, was slumped on the remains of her flower bed, clutching her binder, her face a study in apoplectic rage. Sal and Manny, who had reappeared as if by magic and had been watching the entire spectacle from the edge of my property, began to slow clap. Officer Miller, a newfound glint of grim satisfaction in his eyes, walked over to Brenda. "Okay, Brenda," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "Let's talk about that ticket. Obstructing a driveway, impeding emergency services, operating an unregistered and uninsured vehicle on a public roadway." He trailed off, clearly enjoying himself. "You know what? I think we're going to need a bigger ticket book." The state police sergeant, before leaving, had also informed the local PD that Second Wind, would be sending the Maple Creek Estates HOA a bill for the considerable expense of the emergency escort and any delays incurred. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my contact at the Regional Emergency Operations Center. "Package is on the move. Thanks for the assist." The reply came almost instantly. "Don't mention it. Good to know you haven't lost your touch. Buy me a beer sometime." An hour later, a final text arrived from the Second Wind Central Dispatcher. "ETA to hospital, 1708. Record time. Surgeon sends his thanks. Maya's parents send their everything." A wave of exhaustion and profound relief washed over me. This was it. This was the reason. The petty annoyances, the bureaucratic nightmares, the endless parade of minor inconveniences, they all faded away in the face of this one crucial success. The following week was interesting. The story of the HOA Karen and the police corridor became local legend, whispered with a mixture of disbelief and amusement. Brenda became a pariah, ostracized by the very community she had so zealously tried to control. The massive fine levied against the HOA by their own management company, at the state's not-so-subtle insistence, didn't help her popularity. A petition for her removal as HOA president circulated faster than gossip at a bridge club. The emergency HOA meeting was a spectacle. Brenda, pale and trembling, tried to defend her actions, citing bylaws and appendices with desperate fervor. I attended, not with anger or vindictiveness, but with a calmly prepared presentation. I didn't even mention the organ transplant directly. Instead, I framed the entire incident as a critical failure in community emergency preparedness. I proposed a new bylaw, which I'd cleverly titled the Good Neighbor Mandate. It explicitly stated that any vehicle reasonably appearing to be engaged in medical or emergency transport was exempt from all HOA parking and permit regulations, and that any individual found to be intentionally obstructing such a vehicle would be subject to the maximum possible fine allowable under state law. It passed unanimously, the room erupting in applause as the final vote was tallied. A week after that, the "For Sale" sign appeared on Brenda's perfectly manicured lawn. Life in Maple Creek Estates slowly began to return to its regularly scheduled programming of minor squabbles over lawn maintenance and holiday decorations. The construction of my workshop continued, the sounds of sawing and hammering a welcome change from the shrill pronouncements of Bylaw 72.4. One sunny afternoon, Sal and Manny were putting the finishing touches on my new workbench. "Hey, Alex," Manny said, his usual silence broken by a rare moment of curiosity. "For real, though, what was in that van?" I looked around my almost finished workshop, a space for creation and repair, a place where logic and order finally reigned supreme. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Just a spare part, Manny," I said, watching a robin land on the edge of the workbench. "For a machine that really needed it." I took a sip of my coffee, the sounds of suburban normalcy a soothing background hum. Across the street, Brenda's house stood empty, waiting for a new owner, someone hopefully less inclined to weaponize golf carts and three-ring binders. The cul-de-sac was finally, blessedly quiet. And in the silence, I could almost hear the faint, hopeful sound of a child breathing easier.